Bank manager makes black CEO. Wait 2 hours. His expression changed the moment the board members walked in. There are moments when power doesn't come from a title, but from a glance, an attitude, and the silent seconds spent waiting in a lavish room. Vivian Carter, the black female CEO of a financial consulting firm, arrived at Highland Crest Bank believing in professionalism and fairness. Instead of being greeted as an equal partner, she was forced to sit and wait for nearly 2 hours, made invisible by cold procedures and biased stares. Everything shifted the instant the boardroom doors swung open and the board members entered, exposing where real authority lay. The very person who had manipulated every rule, the branch manager, suddenly froze, confused and flustered, when he realized that the outsider he'd sidelined was precisely the person no one in the system could afford to ignore. This isn't just a story about a loan agreement. It's a journey to reclaim respect, to awaken a system that once considered itself untouchable, and a reminder that true recognition is something we must demand for ourselves. Under the scorching midday sun of Houston, traffic flowed past the towering glass skyscrapers, mirroring a brilliant early summer sky. On the stone sidewalk, Vivian Carter's heels clicked with purpose and pride. A woman who'd conquered the financial world countless times over, yet still felt the weight of having to prove herself again because of her skin color. The automatic glass doors of Highland Crest Bank slid open, pulling her into another world, one where every inch radiated a chilling, unspoken power. The air turned cool instantly, laced with the scent of espresso, new leather from designer sofas, a hint of chair polish, and a faint trace of perfume. Subtle reminders that here, clients were expected to know their place. The vast lobby soared overhead, crystal chandeliers casting a cold, distant glow. Rows of leather benches, lush potted plants by expansive windows, and dark wood panels reflecting soft amber light created an atmosphere at once majestic and unwelcoming. In the distance, the steady tap of leather shoes on marble, groups of employees in crisp white shirts and ties murmuring over iPads, all suggested a confidence seemingly hardwired into this space. At the reception desk, Vivian met the cool gaze of Melissa Stone, her blonde hair pulled back, nude lipstick adding to her polished professionalism, her posture the epitome of high-end bank hospitality. Melissa offered a polite but empty smile, her eyes briefly scanning Vivian's curly hair, caramel brown suit, and matte black heels. A practiced evaluation of someone judged within seconds. "Welcome to Highland Crest. Do you have an appointment?" The words were courteous, but the tone betrayed indifference. Vivian placed her leather handbag on the counter and returned the smile. "I'm Vivian Carter. I have an appointment with Mr. Marcus Kramer at 11 o'clock. Melissa checked her screen, tapped a few keys, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes, your name's here. Please take a seat. Mr. Kramer will see you shortly." There was no warm welcome, no offer of water, no genuine courtesy she'd expected at high-level meetings. Melissa merely pointed toward the waiting area and focused back on her monitor, as if Vivian were just another name in a long list, hardly worthy of special attention. Vivian drew in a steady breath, tamping down the flicker of disappointment. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered this treatment, and it wouldn't be the last. But today, she resolved not to let this icy reception diminish her. She moved to one of the leather benches and quietly observed the opulence around her. Each crystal prism, sideways glance, and rehearsed greeting speaking to an unspoken code. Here, not everyone truly belongs. Vivian set her handbag down softly and chose a seat by the large floor-to-ceiling window, where the early summer sun slanted through the glass, tracing sharp patterns of light across the polished stone floor. It felt as though time had frozen between two worlds. Outside, the heat and bustle. Inside, a controlled silence where every movement was monitored, and everyone was watching everyone else. She told herself to stay calm, but her eyes kept drifting across the small clusters of people chatting in the lobby. Soft laughter, hushed conversations about stocks and multi-million-dollar investments, phone calls negotiating deals. It all painted a picture of insider privilege. The men and women here wore impeccable suits, perfectly knotted ties, expensive wristwatches, and hair slicked back with gel. They spoke in a secret language of the elite, enough to make anyone new to this scene feel like an outsider. Glancing at her watch, she saw it was 10:45. Vivian always arrived early, especially in places where a single minute late could be branded unprofessional. She prided herself on her punctuality. As a woman entrepreneur, she'd built her reputation on the smallest details, acutely aware that in this world of power, every second was another battle to be taken seriously. But the minutes stretched on. 11 o'clock, 11:05, 11:15, 11:30. The shafts of sunlight crept farther across the floor, a reminder that time showed no mercy. No one called her name. No one offered an update. Melissa, the blonde receptionist, remained at her desk, exuding cold efficiency, occasionally glancing toward Vivian with a blank, unreadable expression. Each time the click of approaching footsteps echoed through the lobby, Vivian's heart leapt, only to fall when the visitor was waved past, never sent to fetch her. Meanwhile, the privileges on display became impossible to ignore. A middle-aged white man in a gray suit arrived and, within seconds, received a warm smile from Melissa and was escorted into the inner offices by another staffer. Then, a well-dressed blonde woman in a designer dress, Prada bag in hand, was greeted with gentle courtesy. No appointment asked for, no request to wait. She simply appeared, and the rules dissolved. Two young men, smartly dressed, breezed in next, joking with the receptionist as if they were regulars. They barely signed the registry before someone came to lead them inside. No line, no pauses. In another corner, a blonde couple chatted cheerfully with Melissa, then were whisked away, leaving Vivian's seat untouched under the harsh glow of the lobby lights. The sense of being rendered invisible seeped into Vivian's mind, colder even than the bank's air conditioning. She'd endured waits like this before, and always told herself she'd grown accustomed to such polite indifference. But today, surrounded by people who looked nothing like her and being denied so plainly, her chest tightened with a mix of anger and pain. Outside, the sun continued to blaze on Houston's glass towers, but inside Highland Crest, the light only served to highlight the divide between the chosen and those like her who were forced to wait. Every glance, every empty smile, even Melissa's indifference. It wasn't personal quirks. It was the face of a system that sorted clients by first impressions alone. Vivian tightened her grip on her bag strap and sat up straight, her gaze unwavering. She vowed she would not leave, and she would not let anyone see fatigue soften her expression. Here, even a sigh could be read as weakness. Yet, deep inside, a seed of defiance had sprouted. Today, she decided, her silence would no longer render her invisible. The longer she sat, the more Vivian felt time inside Highland Crest Bank move unlike anywhere else. It was as if time were a thick, viscous liquid, inching past each mark on the clock and making every thought feel heavy. She glanced outside. The summer sun had started to lean low, clouds casting long, shifting shadows across the sidewalk. In here, though, the air stayed so frigid it nearly froze her emotions. Vivian bit her lip, forcing herself to swallow her discomfort. Since starting her career, she'd learned to keep her cool in halls of power. but the chill here tested her patience on another level. It wasn't the blunt coldness of honesty. It was a hollow, robotic politeness. Sweet on the surface but empty inside, a silent armor of authority. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Vivian stood and walked to the reception desk. A few heads turned, part surprise, part disdain, as if she'd broken some unspoken rule of this place. "Excuse me," she said evenly, as politely as she could, though her heart was pounding. "Has Mr. Marcus Kramer been informed that I'm still waiting?" Melissa didn't look up from her screen. Her fingers fluttered over the keyboard, as if she were occupied with something far more important than Vivian's presence. "He's in a meeting, and will see you shortly," came the clipped reply, no extra syllables, and no hint of a smile or sympathy. Vivian drew in a steady breath. "Could you give me a more specific estimate?" she pressed. Experience had taught her that promises without details were meaningless in places like this. Melissa shrugged, eyes fixed on the monitor. "I'm not sure. It shouldn't be long." Just 4 words, delivered as casually as a breeze, but they hit Vivian like a blow, a dismissive answer that was both apology and dismissal, without even pretending to care. Behind that veneer of courtesy, Vivian felt a clear message. "You're not important enough for me to bother about." Melissa's tone wasn't an accident. It was the product of people trained to sort clients by invisible criteria. To them, politeness isn't about welcoming. It's about drawing lines and maintaining power. No anger, no insults, just quietly bury someone's presence in a fog of properness and busyness. Vivian stood for another moment, realizing she'd become part of their game. A game with no clear rules, only silent exclusion under the guise of procedure and civility. She met Melissa's gaze, searching for any spark of empathy, but found only a wall of cold indifference. Returning to her seat, Vivian felt not just time stretching out, but herself being stretched thin, as if the more she waited patiently, the smaller she became before a machine fueled by discrimination. Every "shortly" felt like a sweet trap, designed to keep her locked outside the door of true respect. Then something inside her shifted, a resolute thought taking root. She would no longer accept being a polite victim. Though she maintained her calm exterior, Vivian's eyes now burned with determination. This silence would end, and if necessary, she would be the one to break it. The sense of being trapped in that polite trap still simmered in Vivian's mind, and suddenly everything felt starkly exposed, impossible to dismiss with any lame excuse about a busy schedule. The click of high heels on the marble floor echoed through the lobby, drawing curious glances from Vivian and everyone else. A middle-aged woman entered, her golden hair in soft waves, porcelain skin, a navy velvet sheath dress perfectly tailored, and a cream-colored Chanel bag draped over her elbow. Her face lit up in a radiant smile as she chatted on her phone in a voice brimming with the refinement and ease of high society. The energy in the room shifted, just a touch livelier, a subtle undercurrent of deference. Melissa, the same receptionist who'd been ice-cold to Vivian, instantly transformed. She straightened, her tone bright and warm as if greeting a Hollywood star. "Good morning, Mrs. Lancaster." The entire lobby seemed to pause. Conversations hushed. Vivian caught fleeting looks of admiration and a hint of envy, directed at the blonde woman. Barbara Lancaster didn't need to answer. She simply nodded and resumed her call. No one bristled. In fact, they looked almost honored to wait on her. Within seconds, a young male staffer appeared at her side, offering a courteous smile. "Please, Mrs. Lancaster, the boardroom is ready. Mr. Matthews is waiting." Mrs. Lancaster thanked him, gave Melissa a gracious smile, and glided past security into the VIP corridor. No one asked if she had an appointment, no ID was checked, no guest book signature required. Doors opened as if by magic just for her. Vivian watched, feeling a bucket of ice-cold water drown her pride. This wasn't merely favoritism, it was a painful reminder that here, the rules bend only for the right kind of person. She glanced back at her own leather chair, alone, under a strip of sunlight that cast a long, lonely shadow, and felt herself reduced to nothing more than an extra, a spectator, in this time-honored performance. Melissa's demeanor had completely flipped. Where moments ago she'd been curt with Vivian, now she was solicitous and attentive to Mrs. Lancaster. Every small gesture, from straightening papers to the tilt of her head, oozed eagerness to please. Vivian couldn't shake the memory of Melissa's earlier dismissive replies. "He'll see you shortly. I'm not sure. Shouldn't be long." And she wondered, would everything really change if she just had lighter skin, a different purse, a different hairstyle? A surge of anger, mingled with humiliation and helplessness, rose in her chest. She thought, this frosty courtesy, this sudden deference to those who belong, it's the invisible barrier millions like her face every day. And she knew that if she stayed silent, those barriers would endure, upheld by polite smiles and empty promises like the ones she'd just heard. Vivian exhaled softly, but a new fire sparked in her eyes. In that moment, she decided, today, she would not leave in silence. Not this time. While Barbara Lancaster had vanished behind the frosted glass, into a realm where power and privilege belonged to someone else, Vivian still sat in the same spot. She glanced at her watch. The minute hand had just slid past the 5. It was 12:05. Half the morning was gone. Outside, Houston seemed to be stirring to life, but inside Highland Crest Bank's lobby, the world remained frozen for her. The crisp blast of the air conditioning, the silhouettes drifting across the marble floor, the distant murmur of conversations about contracts and stocks, and the steady click of keyboards all sounded as if they were orchestrated for someone else. By now, the waiting area was empty except for Vivian. The gray-suited men, the designer-dressed blonde women, the special clients, all had been ushered in or had completed their business long ago. Only she remained, and a silence so oppressive it felt suffocating. In that hush, every one of Vivian's senses sharpened. She could hear the precise click of high heels, the soft scrape of leather chairs at teller stations, and, most pointedly, the hushed voices just beyond the reception desk. "For Mrs. Lancaster, it's always an exception." A young female employee's half-joking, half-serious remark rang out behind Melissa's desk. A deeper male voice replied with a hint of irony, "Who can blame them? Anyone with her profile would be top priority at any bank." Laughter followed, then faded as they realized Vivian was still there, silent but unmistakable. A silence that forced them to see her, even if they didn't want to. Vivian slowly turned to meet their eyes, but they both looked away, pretending nothing had been said. She didn't need confirmation. She'd heard enough to know the real rules here weren't written on appointment slips or the customer first signs dotted around the lobby. The rules were in those unspoken nods, the polite smiles reserved for a chosen few, in a soft power wielded through indifference and cold soons. She looked back at Melissa Stone, now fully back in her impassive role. Melissa sat upright, shoulders relaxed, fingers gliding over the keyboard, but her eyes tracked the passing designer suits with calculated appraisal. When they flicked to Vivian, they were empty, betraying no embarrassment or remorse, only the practiced look of someone accustomed to making others feel they simply didn't belong. Vivian felt it more keenly than ever. She wasn't forgotten. She'd been consciously excluded. With each passing minute, anger rose in her chest, mingling with humiliation, shame, and a bitterness she thought she'd long outgrown. She recalled her childhood in rural Texas, the first time she felt a wary stare because of her skin, and her mother's warning, "If you want respect, you'll need twice the effort, 3 times the patience, and 10 times the courage." But today, Vivian realized effort and patience alone wouldn't suffice, because some systems were designed never to grant her fairness, no matter how hard she tried. Discrimination here wasn't overt words or actions. It was a silent force powered by polite neglect and the selective preferencing of clients. Trapped in that silence, one could almost believe they didn't deserve better. A surge of righteous fury ignited within her. She caught sight of herself in the glossy floor, her suit sleeves slightly wrinkled, her lips dry, her eyes weary after an hour and a half of being invisible. Every nerve seemed charged with anger, not just for herself, but for the hundreds of thousands who'd been sidelined by courteous hands like Melissa's, by cold soons from Marcus Kramer, and by the silent complicity of everyone who saw the injustice and looked away. Vivian inhaled deeply, forcing herself to sit tall as if pushing back against the invisible weight of the entire lobby. But this time, her eyes no longer conveyed endurance. They shone with resolution. She would not let today end the way so many had. Quietly walking away so that Melissa could smile at the next Barbara Lancaster, and she would become just another invisible wall in this bank. Glancing at her phone, no texts, no calendar alerts from the bank, it was as if her existence had been erased from every system. Outraged, she couldn't sit another second. Enough, she told herself. It's time to break the silence. And so, in that vast, chilly lobby, Vivian surveyed her surroundings. The classical paintings, the meticulously trimmed plants, the faces lifting and dropping as if cast in a play designed to underline that true power here belonged to a select few. Everyone else was merely a drifting shadow, waiting, hoping, and at times, giving up. But Vivian wasn't born to give up. Every fiber of her being came alive. She knew that if she walked away, she'd only carry another scar to her dignity. And if she stayed, today, she would not only reclaim her right but force this entire system to confront its own truth. She rose to her feet, straightened her blazer, and took decisive steps toward the reception desk, her gaze fixed on Melissa, the very personification of indifferent authority just moments ago. The ambient sounds of the lobby seemed to hush, leaving only the echo of Vivian's heels matching the fierce beat of her heart. The hushed whispers behind her stopped, as if everyone was waiting to see what she would do next. It was time for the invisible wall to speak. The sound of Vivian's heels rang out evenly across the cold stone floor, blending with the sustained hush of the vast lobby, not impulsive or panicked, but fueled by years of distilled resolve born from being overlooked, pushed to the margins, and forced to choose, accept it or speak up. She strode toward the corridor leading to the management offices. The frosted glass door stood silent and imposing like a fortress wall, the boundary of real authority, where every rule was built to exclude those who didn't belong. But today, Vivian refused to let old wounds of pride hold her back. Every step asserted it. She was here to claim her place, not just for herself, but for every voice like hers waiting out there. Melissa realized her intent in an instant. The receptionist's usually indifferent face flickered with genuine surprise. "Excuse me, you can't go in there." But her words trailed off as Vivian kept walking, never glancing back or pausing. She simply tilted her head and flashed Melissa a quick look, enough to make clear that routine refusals would no longer work today. The glass door swung open. Inside lay a quiet expanse of dark, wood-paneled walls that absorbed the light, a gray carpeted corridor stretching to the far end. Every door bore a gleaming brass nameplate under the soft yellow glow of recessed lighting, and the only sound was the air conditioner's low hum, as if it quietly sighed alongside Vivian. She slowed her pace and scanned the hallway. How many times before had she been led through a side entrance, or told to wait just a moment, or relegated to a small conference room, yet never once walked boldly into the center of power? A thrill of both trepidation and defiance rose within her. Sometimes, to break the system, you must be the first to break its rules. At the end of the hall, a polished nameplate read, Marcus Kramer, Branch Manager. Vivian paused, smoothed the collar of her blazer, and drew in a steady breath. She knocked, neither too hard nor too light, just enough to signal, I'm here and I deserve to be. Inside, Marcus Kramer looked up. His steely blue-gray eyes reflected the glow of his laptop screen. He wore a dark navy suit, his salt-and-pepper hair immaculately styled, and his posture leaned forward, the stance of a man used to controlling every detail in his domain. Surprise, mingled with annoyance, crossed his face. Clearly, he wasn't accustomed to someone simply walking in. Vivian entered deliberately, closed the door behind her, and never took her eyes off him. In that instant, two worlds met. On one side, the representative of the system. On the other, someone too familiar with exclusion from rooms like this, but today refusing to play that role. Mr. Kramer slid his hand off the keyboard and lifted his head, his voice measured but tinted with irritation. Ms. Carter, I don't think you should have entered uninvited. Vivian held his gaze and spoke firmly, without lowering her tone. I've been waiting far too long, Mr. Kramer. I believe I have the same right as any other client to meet you at our scheduled time. Marcus's brow furrowed. He flipped through papers on his desk as if seeking an excuse. My schedule today is very tight. If you can be patient a bit longer. Vivian cut him off, emphasizing each word. I've been patient, over an hour and a half. She stressed the duration, not to complain, but to remind him that in the real world, every minute of waiting is a wound to the dignity of someone who knows her own worth. Marcus met her gaze and recognized not pleading, but an unyielding will. In that moment, the room seemed to freeze. The air conditioner, the overhead lights, even his rehearsed justifications fell silent. All right, Miss Carter. He swallowed a sigh and reclaimed his composure. Please have a seat. Vivian moved to the chair across from him, not because Marcus granted permission, but because she claimed her own space. She set her briefcase on the desk and placed her files before her, her eyes never leaving the branch manager. In that charged moment, Vivian knew she had shattered a rule. No longer guided by the system, today she rewrote the playbook, demanding her right to exist, to be seen, to be treated fairly. She wasn't just representing herself, but all those out there too timid to cross this frosted glass threshold. But how would Marcus, embodying the deep-rooted power of this institution, respond? Would he smooth things over, deny what had happened, or cling to polite veneers to mask discrimination? Or might he let the truth show? This system was never meant for everyone. A brief hush fell over the room. Both understood. This moment, though small, marked the boundary between exclusion and self-determination. Outside, the sun had slid westward, but inside, a silent battle had only just begun. The brief silence in the conference room was broken by Marcus Kramer's clipped voice. His eyes, irritated yet betraying a hint of embarrassment, fixed on Vivian through his gold-rimmed glasses. "Miss Carter, you were supposed to wait until I called you." Each word landed like a verdict, both reminder and warning, an authority all too familiar to anyone seated behind this mahogany desk. Marcus stressed proper protocol, as if Vivian's silence and patience were not only expected, but mandatory for anyone not on the bank's secret priority lists. Vivian refused to back down or swallow her anger. Her reply was measured but icy. "I've waited for over an hour and a half." She needed no more words. Those 7 syllables, over an hour and a half, sliced through the room's polite veneer, exposing a truth Marcus had chosen to ignore or simply couldn't see. She wasn't here to beg. It was time to demand answers. Marcus looked flustered, one hand still resting on the stack of files, as though it were his last line of defense. He inhaled, struggling to reclaim the composure of a man in control. "I sincerely apologize for the wait, but today we are extremely busy. There's a constant flow of clients, several VIPs, urgent appointments." Vivian didn't let him hide behind excuses. She cut him off, her voice firm and unapologetic. "I'm a client too. I had an appointment. Yet I've watched at least 5 others, some without appointments, be ushered in ahead of me." "Why?" A heavy hush fell over the room. On one side sat Marcus, an embodiment of power wielded through rules and exceptions. On the other stood Vivian, carrying not just her own indignation, but the frustration of countless people underestimated by this very system. The soft yellow light from above highlighted the crow's feet at the corners of Marcus's eyes, lines not just of age, but of every time he'd evaded questions of fairness. He looked away, his tone softening even as it grew more distant, as if addressing a shadow rather than a person. There must be some confusion. Sometimes procedures overlap, reception follows separate directives for VIPs, or special cases arise. I assure you, there's no intent to discriminate." Vivian held his gaze. His eyes flickered with unease. She pressed her advantage, her question cutting through his deflections. "Or is it a choice?" 3 words, each weighted, silenced every feeble justification Marcus offered. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation he could not ignore. Marcus swallowed hard and glanced toward the hallway, perhaps hoping to find a phantom ally out there. But he was alone now. No receptionist, no email system, no procedural shield. Just him and the truth awaiting exposure. He tried to rally his old confidence. "We never intend to exclude anyone here. Ms. Carter, we evaluate clients based on their profile, financial capacity, and credit history. Those admitted first are typically priority cases per internal policy or direct instructions from higher-ups. It's necessary flexibility for a large organization." Vivian leaned forward, her voice sharp. "And that flexibility, is it reserved only for those who fit a certain mold? For those you feel belong? Or, to put it bluntly, to quietly exclude those who don't?" Her words were no longer polite. They were a mirror reflecting this system's naked operation. She saw Marcus's fingers tighten, knuckles whitening in a gesture of discomfort. In that moment, the air grew thick. The dark wood paneling, the pale glow of the overhead lights, even the laptop's dim screen felt powerless before the weight of prejudice and discrimination. Nothing remained to conceal, only the raw nature of power, the power to bend rules for some while ignoring others. Marcus attempted to shift back to her loan file. "Anyway, I've reviewed your application. Impressive. Sound finances, a clear business plan. However, policy has tightened recently." Vivian interrupted once more. "Don't evaluate me on my file. I built my company from the ground up. I know my worth. What I want to know, Mr. Kramer, is why this same system enforces two entirely different standards. Why do people like me, prepared, scheduled, fully qualified, have to wait while others get priority without explanation? Her voice resonated, no longer confined by courteous restraint. It was the voice of someone refusing a lifetime spent on the margins, because the system chose to sort people by invisible criteria. Marcus sank back in his chair, his expression darkening. He understood that from this point on, every word he uttered could either become evidence against himself or salvage the last shred of dignity he had left in his vaunted fair process. The room remained motionless. But inside, a boundary had been crossed. The boundary between enduring and demanding the truth. And for the first time that day, Marcus felt it. Today, it wasn't him setting the rules, but Vivian Carter. The room remained thick with tension as Vivian's question hung in the air. Across the desk, Marcus straightened in his chair, eyes fixed on the stack of files, clearly searching for something to steady the authority that was slipping through his fingers. "There is no discrimination here, Ms. Carter," Marcus began, striving for certainty in his tone. He had practiced that line hundreds of times, in internal trainings, in front of auditors and media statements, but today it offered no comfort. Even he heard the slight tremor in his voice, more self-reassurance than conviction. Vivian refused to be distracted by that glossy veneer of boilerplate assurances. She sat tall, unblinking, hands clasped neatly on the table, and spoke with razor-sharp clarity. "I've seen this routine in many places, Mr. Kramer. Polite, but exclusive. On the surface, you call me a client, a partner, but in practice, you've sidelined me with endless waiting, half-hearted apologies, and special exceptions granted only to the right kind of people. You call it waiting, but in reality, it's an indirect refusal." Marcus's face flushed. The practiced calm cracked under genuine embarrassment. His fingertips drummed on the polished desk, each tap betraying his unease. His dark suit, glossy tie, even the brass nameplate on his desk could no longer mask his defensiveness. His voice came out rushed, nearly breaking. "Would you like to discuss your loan?" The sudden shift to business, clinging to protocol at that moment, only laid bare his true intent. To mask the real issue, which is that power here isn't for everyone, only for those the system deems worthy. Vivian kept her gaze locked on him, calm yet uncompromising. She nodded once, not in concession but as a step deeper into the matter. "We will talk about the loan, but before we discuss numbers, I want you to face this reality. Those who were ushered in before me this morning, what set them apart beyond being white, familiar clients, fitting your definition of belonging?" Marcus clenched his hands, his breath shallow. He knew he had no rebuttal. This truth was too plain. If he said more, it would be like painting over a crack in broad daylight. "We follow a standard client intake process, sometimes VIPs or directives from headquarters," he began. Vivian cut him off, her voice steady but charged with anger. "How many times have I heard VIP client, headquarters directives? It's always a screen for special cases, which, in truth, serve only a select group, and me. Qualified by every criterion, I remain the exception who sits outside, who waits, who must remind herself to be patient until she becomes invisible." The air in the room thickened. Marcus dared not meet her eyes. He turned away, fiddling with the files as if adjusting them might restore his composure, but every movement was awkward. "You're mistaken. Here, we assess clients on many factors," he mumbled. Vivian needed no further pretense. She leaned back, unwavering. I'm not mistaken. Not just at this bank, but at every institution I've walked into. You operate by unspoken rules, claim everyone is equal, while quietly sidelining people like me, hoping they remain patient enough to wait, weary enough to give up, polite enough to stay silent. Marcus fell silent. His hands shook slightly on the desk. The hush stretched so long you could hear the clock second hand on the wall. No keyboard clicks, no assured banker's voice. Just the raw truth laid bare, and neither could look away. After a moment, Marcus tried to reclaim a businesslike tone, grasping at a lifeline. At any rate, your loan application is strong. If you need anything else to finalize it, I'm here to help. Vivian regarded him with a look equal parts pity and steel, an unspoken reminder that she wasn't here only for a loan, but to reclaim a fairness this system had been eroding, day by day, in those long hours of waiting. In that taut silence, every excuse fell flat. Marcus sat smaller behind the desk, the seat of power now a throne of defense, while Vivian, alone in the room, stood as boldly as anyone who ever dared speak for the thousands submerged by this so-called polite exclusion. They both knew. From this moment on, nothing could return to the way it was. The truth had been spoken, and the divide between surface fairness and fundamental injustice lay fully exposed. The tension in Marcus's office, already thick with the truth that had just been laid bare, was abruptly pierced by the steady click of leather shoes on the carpeted hallway outside. That confident, measured pace, so different from the hesitant steps of junior staff, instantly drew everyone's attention. A clear, commanding voice rang out, decisive, self-assured, unmistakably belonging to someone used to leading an entire organization. As Marcus's door swung open, 3 men entered, all dressed in high-end suits, dark ties, and polished shoes. They carried an invisible aura reserved for those who truly hold power in the banking world. At their head was Richard Langford, the CEO of Highland Crest Bank, a symbol of success and authority, and quietly feared by everyone under his command. His expression was both stern and experienced, his sharp gaze surveying every corner of the empire he'd built. For Vivian, Richard wasn't just a powerful CEO, he was a former collaborator with Carter's strategies on major projects. The moment he spotted Vivian, Richard's face transformed. His work-focused demeanor gave way to a warm, surprised smile. He strode quickly toward her, extending his hand in front of a flustered Marcus, as if the branch manager didn't even exist. Vivian, I never expected to see you here. You're still running Carter Strategies, right? His voice filled the room with genuine recognition and respect. Vivian returned his smile, rose, and shook his hand with poised confidence. No longer the overlooked client in a bureaucratic machine, but a formidable financial partner, once personally invited by Highland Crest's CEO to advise on last year's largest digital transformation. Yes, I'm still at the helm of Carter Strategies. It's wonderful to see you again, Richard. Her voice rang with strength, the smoldering indignation of moments ago now transformed into unshakable confidence. As she'd anticipated, in this world, the right handshake can change everything. Marcus stood behind them, his face draining of color. He'd never imagined that the client he'd tried to sideline with flexible protocols would have a direct relationship with the CEO, let alone as a peer. His outer composure crumbled into palpable embarrassment. He stammered, attempting to interject, "Mr. Langford, I wasn't aware that Ms." Richard didn't look back. He simply lifted a hand to forestall Marcus, his gaze remaining locked on Vivian. For someone in Marcus's position, that gesture was the end of every excuse. The two board members standing behind Richard nodded in unison at the name Vivian Carter, their faces showing clear respect. "Vivian, I thought you were on a business trip to New York. What brings you to the Houston branch today?" Vivian faced the CEO directly, her response both candid and tactful. "I had an appointment with Mr. Kramer to discuss a loan for a new project. Unfortunately, it ran longer than expected." Richard paused for a moment, then turned his steely gaze to Marcus, his smile gone. He knew exactly what had happened here. He'd heard dozens of stories about branches being flexible with clients, but this flexibility had clearly been misapplied. Longer than expected, Richard emphasized each word, the light-hearted tone of a reunion replaced by the razor-sharp scrutiny of a leader. "Exactly how long, Marcus?" Marcus broke into a sweat, struggling to regain his managerial poise, but visibly shaken, his eyes searching desperately for a lifeline. "Sir, there were some complications. I take full responsibility. My schedule has been packed." Richard cut him off decisively. "No. I want to hear it from Vivian. How long?" Without hesitation, Vivian replied, "Over an hour and a half. I confirmed the appointment and arrived on time. Yet those who came in after me, some without appointments, were given priority." A heavy silence swept through the room like a chill. Richard Langford flicked a glance at the two board members behind him. They, too, frowned. He returned his gaze to Vivian, nodded his thanks, then deliberately sat down in the chair opposite Marcus. Instantly, his commanding presence compressed the space into one defined by truth and consequence. Marcus could only bow his head, his hands clasped tightly as the man who realized he'd just dug his own grave. Vivian was no longer the sidelined outsider. Standing before those who truly held power, she embodied every voice that had ever been dismissed. Now the person everyone needed to hear. And in that moment, real power made itself known. A reminder that no one remains invisible forever. And that every system, no matter how cleverly concealed, eventually must face the truth. The room seemed to freeze in that moment, the sounds from the hallway all but silenced by the presence of the bank's three most powerful figures. Under the harsh white lights, Marcus's confusion became painfully obvious. His temples slick with sweat, his lips parched. Every bit of the polished facade he'd used to manipulate procedures now lay shattered, revealing a man plummeting between shame and panic. He stammered, blinking rapidly. There was a scheduling mix-up, Mr. Langford. I instructed reception to confirm, but it seems—" Richard cut him off without listening to the rest. His gaze ice-cold, his face frozen in unforgiving resolve. The entire room seemed to shrink under that look. "How long did Miss Carter have to wait?" Richard asked, never taking his eyes off Marcus. Vivian understood the weight of the moment. She met Richard's gaze and let silence stretch just long enough for Marcus's discomfort to settle deep into every corner of the room, underscoring the cost of habitual discrimination and contempt. At last, she exhaled and replied, "Nearly an hour and a half." One of the board members standing behind Richard furrowed his brow, glancing at Marcus. That single frown, coming from someone as seasoned in politics as Marcus, carried more weight than 100 condemnations, signaling a real threat to his standing in this institution. Richard's anger flared. His hands clenched on the desk, knuckles pale, his voice cutting through with chilling authority. "Marcus, step outside. We'll discuss this later." Marcus froze for a moment, then bowed his head in a forced show of deference. "Yes, Mr. Langford." He gathered his papers clumsily, casting Vivian a look of regret tinged with bitterness. The look of a man who has just realized that every excuse he once used has become a cruel joke. In that instant, Marcus grasped how fragile the power he wielded truly was. One inconvenient truth, one well-timed question, and all his masks and networks of privilege tumbled down. The door slammed behind Marcus, the sound as final as it was harsh, slicing through every layer of pretense he'd hidden behind. Instantly, the room's atmosphere shifted. No more charades, no more petty lies, only a cold reckoning with the consequences. The two remaining board members stood at attention, their eyes fixed on Vivian as if seeing her for the first time as someone who could not be ignored. Richard took a steadying breath, his features softening slightly but still bearing the sternness of a leader accountable for the bank's reputation. He turned to Vivian, the remorse in his expression clear. "I offer you my sincere apology, Vivian. This is entirely unacceptable at Highland Crest." Vivian nodded, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not the only one who's been through this, Richard, and I believe one apology isn't nearly enough." Richard paused, then addressed the two board members. "Please stay after this meeting. I want a full review of the client reception process at our Houston branch, and I expect a detailed report by week's end." The room grew heavy with unvarnished seriousness. A power structure had been shaken to its core, not by a major scandal, but by the accumulation of small injustices that, the moment one person dared to speak up, caused all the masks to tumble away. Vivian settled back into her chair, the weight in her chest lifting bit by bit. She knew she had done what few have the patience and courage to do, force an entire system to confront its own truth, and compel those accustomed to hiding behind masks to pay for their discrimination. Outside, Houston's midday sun still blazed across the sidewalks. But inside this conference room, a quiet storm had just passed, leaving behind a heavy silence and changed gazes, directed at Marcus, at Vivian, and at Highland Crest Bank itself. As the door closed behind Marcus, the atmosphere seemed to loosen, giving way to a new undercurrent, the focused attention of those who truly shaped the fate of a branch, and even an entire financial institution. Richard Langford, no longer the picture of a frosty CEO, slowly pulled out a chair and sat down across from Vivian. Though the movement was slight, it spoke volumes of his seriousness and respect. The two board members stepped forward to the table, standing behind Richard like silent witnesses, quiet, yet unmistakably present. Richard fixed his gaze on Vivian, his voice dropping to a tone that carried both regret and determination. "I want to offer you my sincere apology. What happened today is absolutely unacceptable at Highland Crest, and it should never happen to any client, especially you." He leaned forward, eyes intent on reading every nuance of Vivian's expression. "I need to hear the entire account, from start to finish. Not just Marcus's actions, but how reception treated you, who was given priority, everything." Vivian nodded, her voice calm and clear. For the first time in a long, excruciating morning, she felt truly heard. Not with polite lip service, but with the full attention of someone prepared to take responsibility and make things right. She began her account without skipping a single detail. The very first look from Melissa Stone at reception when Vivian walked in. The mechanical, indifferent responses. "Shortly. I'm not sure. He's in a meeting," with no real effort to verify or explain. Each subsequent client who arrived after her, white men in gray suits, blonde women in designer dresses, greeted warmly and escorted into management without waiting or appointment checks. The special treatment of Barbara Lancaster, a clearly favored regular, by both reception and staff, and the suspiciously flexible process when she arrived. Marcus's indifferent shrug and smooth excuses throughout, from leaving Vivian in the lobby to her bold entry into his office without permission. Richard and the board members listened intently, never interrupting or showing impatience. Each time Vivian described another instance of unwarranted coldness or priority, Richard's expression darkened and his lips tightened. The room grew heavy with exposed truths. Truths that revealed these weren't isolated incidents, but systemic flaws. When Vivian concluded saying, "I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want the same respect any other client receives. And I believe I'm not alone in this." Richard fell silent for a moment, then turned to his colleagues. "Do you hear that? We talk endlessly about diversity and inclusion, yet the reality remains outdated rules enforced by exceptions and personal biases." He looked back to Vivian, his gaze unwavering. "This will not end with an apology. I will take personal action regarding Marcus and anyone directly involved. But more profoundly, I want you to know, your voice today has awakened this entire system. That fairness cannot remain only on paper." One board member quietly added, "Thank you for speaking up. There are things internal reports or staff surveys never capture." Richard leaned toward Vivian, his grip tightening with resolve. "We will commission a full review involving our risk management and human resources teams. Meanwhile, I commit to approving your loan application and launching a comprehensive audit of client reception processes across all branches. If you need to meet with me directly, anytime, I'm at your disposal." Vivian met Richard's eyes and saw not just a promise, but a genuine acknowledgement of her value and the respect a system owes its clients. For the first time that day, she felt a lightness, not about the loan, but because her voice had been heard by the right people, at the right time, by the right person. And Richard in that moment realized true power isn't about choosing who gets priority. It's about having the courage to confront and correct what's wrong, even if it means stripping away the very masks that hide a system's flaws. The meeting room felt strangely heavy, not from overt tension, but from the weight of responsibility now resting on its leader. After hearing Vivian's full account, Richard Langford immediately switched into full crisis management mode. He turned to a subordinate near the door, his voice decisive. "Where's Miss Carter's file? Bring it here." Within minutes, a thick dossier stamped Carter Strategies, with the note, "Project Investment Loan," was on the table. Richard flipped it open, his eyes skimming the sections with the keen insight of a seasoned executive, pausing over key financial pages. The room went silent as the board members and Vivian felt the gravity of the moment. This branch's fate, reputation, and future hung on every page. In under 10 minutes, Richard snapped the file shut. He looked up at Vivian, then directly at the two board members. "This file is impeccable. Every metric exceeds our standards. If we'd followed procedure, Ms. Carter should have been approved from the start. Let's expedite this. I want the approval email sent to her today." No one dared delay. One board member immediately jotted notes and messaged the operations team. Vivian witnessed real power in action, not indifferent stalling, but speed, efficiency, and resolve, a transparency that outsiders like her see only in rare moments. Richard turned to the remaining board members, his tone calm but unmistakably firm. "I want a full audit of our client, reception process at this branch, everything from front desk procedures and appointment confirmations to special case handling and any exceptions over the past 3 months. Marcus Kramer is to be suspended pending an internal investigation. Report back to me with full findings this week." One board member hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Langford, how severely will we hold Marcus accountable?" Richard didn't skip a beat. "That depends on the investigation. If there's evidence of discrimination or service standard violations, I will not tolerate any excuse. Highland Crest's reputation is built on client trust, not the personal power of individual managers." The room fell silent. Each of Richard's words landed like a hammer strike, a commitment not only to Vivian but to the bank's entire staff. The message was clear. There is no gray area for those who abuse power, no exception for intentional bias. He looked back at Vivian, his voice warm yet resolute. "I know an apology can't erase the harm done, but I promise this will be a lesson. Not just for Marcus, but for the entire system. I will personally send you a letter of apology and inform all senior managers at Highland Crest. This will not happen again." Vivian met Richard's gaze. For the first time that day, she saw in his eyes not just the authority of a CEO, but a genuine understanding of his responsibility for a systemic failure. She nodded slowly, accepting change, even knowing it wouldn't happen overnight. Finally, Richard stood and extended his hand. It wasn't a perfunctory peace offering, but a gesture of genuine commitment, proof of an organization's resolve to change. "Thank you for speaking up. Not everyone has the courage to make us face ourselves." Vivian squeezed his hand, her sense of dignity and security returning, not just for herself, but for all the clients who'd been left behind by cold courtesy. Outside, the afternoon sun was dipping low, its light streaming through the windows and casting their joined hands in silhouette. One side, an individual brave enough to demand justice. The other, an institution strong enough to confront its mistakes, make amends, and uphold its honor. Golden afternoon light streamed through the window, casting a sparkling sheen across the conference table, emphasizing the importance of what was unfolding here, where an internal procedure had been upended at its core by the unwavering voice of a customer once thought insignificant. Vivian stood, her face serene, but her eyes resolute. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the fatigue built up over a morning spent on the sidelines, seemed replaced now by a renewed conviction. She had done the right thing, not just for herself. She looked directly at Richard, just minutes ago the embodiment of a rigid system, now transformed into a leader willing to confront mistakes and ready to act. "Mr. Langford, I know you're striving to make things right. I appreciate the commitments you've made, but you must understand, approving a loan and issuing an official apology, none of that can erase the experience of being demeaned, treated as if I weren't worthy, simply because I didn't fit the ideal profile some here assume." Richard fell silent, his expression revealing a genuine introspection, an awareness that real harm sometimes does not come from figures on a contract, but from moments when one's humanity is denied, by glances, by words, by waiting, and by a system that quietly pushes people aside. After a moment he spoke, his voice deeper and slower than before. "Rest assured, Vivian, what you've shared today will not be dismissed as a minor incident and forgotten. I promise real change. Change that goes to the root, not just the surface. We will retrain our staff, review every customer touchpoint, and build transparent processes so that every person is treated fairly. No one should ever decide another's value based on bias or prejudice." Vivian nodded, her shoulders still squared, as if to affirm that she was listening, but not swayed by promises alone. "Thank you, Richard. I only hope that next time, someone sitting out there, in the lobby, in any Highland Crest seat, won't have to wait for a CEO to arrive before they're respected." Respect and fairness should begin at the front door and last until the moment each guest leaves. For everyone, whether their name is Carter, Lancaster, or anything else. The room fell into a profound silence, charged with the weight of that truth. The board members exchanged glances, acknowledging the rarity of what they'd just witnessed. A customer whose honesty and resolve forced the entire organization to look inward. Richard stepped forward, determination and humility in his voice. "I promise you, Vivian, I will personally oversee this transformation. No more token processes, no more perfunctory handshakes to smooth things over. We need people like you, those who dare to speak the truth and compel us to grow and mature." Vivian met his gaze and saw in it a deep empathy uniting client and leader. That empathy, small as it might seem, held more power than any administrative measure, reminding everyone that financial metrics and growth targets mean nothing without respect and dignity for each individual. In that moment, Vivian felt a profound relief, not because of the loan, but because she had become part of a genuine shift, from an exception forced to wait patiently to a voice brave enough to hold power accountable. She smiled, a smile that said she was no longer alone. And from that day forward, Highland Crest would be different. The meeting room door closed behind her, cutting Vivian off from the hushed discussions and lofty commitments of the bank's most powerful. She strode down the silent corridor, each heartbeat pounding, not with anxiety or anger, but with the fierce vitality of reclaiming her right to exist and be heard. At the reception area, Vivian slowed and glanced toward the front desk. Melissa Stone, once the architect of icy indifference, sat rigid, hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Their eyes met for an instant before hers darted away, as if her carefully maintained mask had been wrenched off. No confident greeting escaped her lips, only the embarrassed silence of someone confronted with the real consequences of those frozen protocols. Vivian said nothing, holding her calm gaze, neither accusing nor forgiving, but knowing that real change begins when those who've stood outside the circle of fairness dare to look inward. Sometimes a single look is enough to remind someone of the barriers they've built, and of the price of upholding them for so long. She exited the bank, passing through the automatic glass doors and leaving behind the mottled silhouettes bathed in upscale yellow lighting. Outside, the Texas sun still blazed, its rays scorching the pavement as if determined to burn away any lingering cold. But Vivian no longer felt small or out of place. Her steps on the broad sidewalk were steady and strong, as if all of Houston had opened to welcome someone reborn by her unwavering quest for justice. Under a street tree's shade, she paused and inhaled deeply, hot asphalt, exhaust fumes, and a warm breeze mingling around her, offering a freedom no amount of money or power could buy. In that moment, her phone chimed. Vivian checked the screen. A new email from Highland Crest Bank. "Congratulations. Your loan application has been approved. Please check your mailbox for further instructions." She smiled. This was more than a financial update or a reward for her perseverance. It was confirmation of a far greater victory, a triumph of dignity, of self-respect, and of the hope to awaken a system that once believed itself beyond reproach. One person had made them pause, reflect, and change, not just for her but for all who had endured silently. Vivian slipped her phone into her pocket and lifted her chin as she stepped into the sunlit street. Across the way, a group of students laughed on their way home from class, and a delivery driver paused by his truck. None knew of the quiet battle she'd just fought inside those walls, but Vivian did, and she knew that from this day forward, each of them would carry a little more faith that they, too, could be seen and respected for who they really are. Beneath the blazing Texas sun, Vivian walked on lightly, carrying not just a signed loan, but a healed scar in her soul and a deep conviction. Sometimes, all it takes is one brave voice to shake a hardened institution, so that future generations no longer bear the shame of invisibility in a world that prides itself on progress and civility. And as she rounded the corner, her silent yet powerful struggle lingered in every gaze, every gesture, and every fading ray of daylight, a lasting reminder of the irreplaceable value of true respect. The late afternoon sun had softened, its golden glow stretching across the Houston sidewalk and glinting off the towering glass walls of Highland Crest Bank, where, just a few hours earlier, Vivian Carter had been made to sit and wait in silence. Now that it was over, she paused and looked back at that building, no longer an untouchable fortress, but the site of a quietly monumental struggle whose impact couldn't be denied. From a distance, the slanting light cut through the glass like a spotlight on all the shadowy corners that power and old habits of discrimination had long concealed. Vivian stood still, shoulders relaxed, her gaze heavy not only with pride, but with deep empathy for the thousands, millions, of other Vivian Carters forced to wait in silence simply because they didn't fit some arbitrary ideal. Somewhere out there, thousands more Vivian Carters are still being made to sit and wait unseen because they don't match someone's definition of standard. That thought resonated in her mind, not as a solitary lament, but as an unacknowledged truth in our modern society. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment, drew a deep breath. In that instant, the noise, the hurt, every half-hearted excuse and condescending glance from people like Melissa Stone or Marcus Kramer, all of it came rushing back. But this time, those memories no longer had the power to push her back. Instead, they fueled her resolve. A wake-up call that respect isn't a gift granted by any system or individual, but the reward of courage, persistence, and belief in your own worth. A small smile touched her lips. She thought of her mother, of all the generations of women of color who climbed social ladders only to be held back by endless, silent waits, and of the men, women, and children still stranded behind those transparent doors that never truly opened for them. She reminded herself, and all those who have ever been dismissed, respect isn't something someone gives you, it's a right, a quality you must claim for yourself. If you feel overlooked or put last, speak up. Even one word, one step, one determined stare can shake a system frozen in place. Don't wait for someone to hand you a seat at the table. Walk right through the opaque doors and demand your place. And if they try to make you wait, make them remember why they were wrong. Turning away, Vivian left behind that glass edifice, no longer flawless, but a place reshaped by its own reckoning. Inside, processes were under review, masks had fallen, and an institution had been forced to hold a mirror up to itself. Vivian Carter's story won't make the big headlines or go viral on social media, but it planted an indelible seed in the minds of everyone who witnessed it, from the powerful CEO and board members to the once arrogant receptionist, that true fairness and respect cannot be built on silent exceptions and hidden injustices. Her footsteps joined the flow of passers-by, the late sun still blazing ahead. But for her, and for all those who've been forced to wait on the sidelines, a new day had truly begun. Wherever there is injustice, there will always be someone brave enough to demand their right to be seen and respected. What do you think of Vivian Carter's journey, her steadfast courage in claiming respect from a system thought immutable? Have you ever felt overlooked or pushed aside for not fitting someone else's standard? Share your experience and thoughts on fairness and respect in today's world in the comments below. If Vivian's story moved you, please like, share with friends, and subscribe to keep exploring these vital lessons in dignity, justice, and the power of one voice. Thank you for listening.